Hi, everybody. Let's get started. So good morning and welcome. So as you know, today we welcome our pastor, Reverend Phil Davis, to speak. As part of our October and our November series, we've tried to remind ourselves of the connections between politics and our religious beliefs. I was part of the pastor interview committee and that offered the role of status supply pastor to Phil. We spoke to him and spoke to those who knew him, and he has helped several local congregations navigate difficult situations with their membership and their conflicts. Those who provided references spoke of his openness and his lack of agendas. He found time and he built relationships before helping others move through their situations. So we're in circumstances also that need pastoral help. The individual and collective histories of this church are unique to it, but they are also reflective of the changing times that we are in. Race and sexuality, trauma and loss, these are factors that are here as well as elsewhere. Anxiety and uncertainty, hope and faith are also factors here as elsewhere. I'm not sure exactly what Phil is going to be challenging us with today. When I spoke with him a few days ago, even he was still waiting to feel and discern what these times are trying to tell him. And perhaps we also need to not jump to conclusions. As we try to imagine a future for Dupsy and ourselves, and we also have to recall what Kevin Hershey said a few weeks ago, we can only take one step at a time into the murkiness of these times. I hope we will continue to meet together, but also with our pastor and within our private thoughts and prayers as we feel and discern our way forward. So ultimately, our past are not past, and I think we have to believe, we're trying to believe, that there is a future that is more loving and connected, and was one that is less haunted by the hurts of the past. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Phil has to say about on the third day, how we got here.
Good morning. So you all know my name, but you don't know, or maybe you don't know, that I'm a diabetic. I ate the wrong food, and that's how I got here. I can assure you that 3 days from now, we'll be wondering how we got here. And so I'm hoping that, some of this information I'm going to share with you today will, kind of, provide some background for, better understanding how we got here. But the most important word I can use this morning is the word reconciliation. There are many people who do not see the world the way you see it. But the important thing to know is that they are not your enemy. Let me say that again. The important thing for you to know is that people who want the exact opposite from what we might want are not our enemies. They have, just like each and every one of us, the imago Dei, the image of God, planted on their souls. We might rightly think and even be convinced that the image of God they have is distorted, think Christian nationalism, but they are God's creation, just as each and every one of us is. Now, let me say that again differently. We may be convinced that the image of God they have is a distortion that was systematically cooked up for economic, political, and social power. And we may believe that to be true, but I stand by the fact that they are not your enemy. People of faith are called to the task of reconciliation. To paraphrase the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he once said, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline." Now, but if you remember anything else I've said this morning, I want you to remember that people of faith are called to the task of reconciliation. in building the beloved community where, as the prophet Isaiah says, the Lord will decide with equity for the meek of the earth. Please remember, on the Sunday before what seems will be the most consequential election in the history of the United States, that my declaration is that people of faith are called to the task of reconciliation. Now, my remarks are labeled in part how we got here. Just what here am I talking about? Right now, here is a place where many American women have no control over their bodies. Maybe you've heard of the Supreme Court case Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and in turn, women in need of gynecological care are dying. Maybe you've heard about the Supreme Court case Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, which ended what's called the Chevron deference, which basically means federal courts no longer have to defer to experts on matters. So the opinion of the Food and Drug Administration does not need to be considered in a discussion about regulatory controls on what's in our food, and the Environmental Protection Agency no longer needs to be consulted about the safety of our water. How did we get here? You've probably heard about Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, and I'll spare you the details. But basically, it says that anybody can spend as much money on political contributions as they want. So that in turn means that my political contributions are competing with the political contributions of oligarchs. And yes, the United States has oligarchs. How did we get here? Now, for the rest of my time, with a very broad canvas and a broad brush, I'm going to put before you a patchwork of ideas which just might explain some of how we got here. Now, I have a close friend from Brooklyn, New York, who, like me, found himself living away from close family and friends. Together, we puzzled out the reality of parenting, but we also had to look at the reality of being African-American men, literally puzzling out how we will survive. We find ourselves often questioning a given reality, and my friend often responds very simply saying, because of slavery. Now, let me attempt to explain to you how all those Supreme Court's decisions I listed had outcomes that made all our lives a little more difficult because of slavery. The Electoral College is widely seen as having been influenced by the compromises made around slavery during the drafting of the U.S. Constitution in 1787. Here's how slavery factored into its design. There was the 3/5 compromise and electoral power, where the number of electoral votes each state had was based on the total number of representatives in Congress, which includes both seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate seats. The 3/5 compromise agreed upon in 1787 counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for purposes of determining a state's population and thus its number of House representatives. Slaveholding states argued that enslaved individuals should be counted fully, even though they had no voting rights or political representations. The northern states opposed this, leading to the compromise that granted southern states more power in electoral college without granting enslaved individuals freedom of representations. And we all know that of the political influence of the slaveholding states. And the design of the Electoral College inherently provided slaveholding states with greater influence by increasing the number of representatives in the House and the Senate. Southern states gained more power in presidential elections. This structure meant that Southern states could protect their interests, including slavery, by having a stronger voice in selecting presidents who were sympathetic to their interest, helping them prevent federal policies that would undermine slavery. Now, this, of course, had long-term effects on political power. The compromise shifted the balance of power for decades, allowing slaveholding states to shape this presidency and thus national policy, which slowed the efforts to abolish slavery. Okay, but my conclusion about this, though, is the Electoral College's formation can therefore be seen as a structural compromise influenced by the institution of slavery, creating a system that preserved disproportionate political power for slaveholding states. The legacy of this design still shapes U.S. presidential elections today, even though the Three-Fifths Compromise was nullified by the abolition of slavery. Because of slavery, formerly slave-holding states, conservative states, have more power in the selection of a president than is consistent with the actual population. Every state, regardless of its population, gets 2 senators. And this has consequences for presidential elections and the selection of Supreme Court justices. So when you look at the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you are looking at something that happened as a consequence of slavery. When you look at the recent overturning of the Chevron defense, again, you are looking at a decision that but for slavery would not have happened. Slavery is, though, just one dimension of how we got here. I'm looking at Wednesday morning. The influence of the slaveholding states is why the Electoral College looks the way it does, and how, despite losing the popular vote, it's how George Bush Jr. and Donald Trump in particular, who had a chance to appoint 3 conservative judges, got into place. But let me just say a little bit more about how we got here. There is no question that the political right has worked principally on the notion of creating a hostile other and dividing the nation along ethnic and racial lines. If its consequences were not so deadly, it would almost be laughable. But there is nothing new about this. Intentionally dividing along racial lines goes back to what history remembers as Bacon's Rebellion. Now, this was a big deal. Anybody here besides me heard of Bacon's Rebellion? Okay, all right. Many argue that the consequence and the backlash from Bacon's Rebellion is what created the white race in the United States. Let me explain how dividing people is nothing new. So a man named Nathaniel Bacon had a failed rebellion, which in turn set in motion the need for 17th century British elites and landowners to lay the groundwork for today's white racial identity. Frankly speaking, it was the profit motive that set all this into motion. 17th century British colonial landowners in Virginia, after Bacon's Rebellion failed, set this in motion. The short explanation is that there were a lot of people who were neither happy or content with their relationship to the British landowners. The white indentured servants were not happy, the Native Americans were not happy, and the Africans were not happy. Nathaniel Bacon, an aristocrat himself, was not happy. This diverse coalition formed the core of what history knows as Bacon's Rebellion. They marched on the governor's mansion, burnt it to the ground, demanding change. The coalition that formed Bacon's Rebellion was crushed because King Charles II of England sent troops to support the governor and the landowners. In its aftermath, the landowners saw that if such a coalition between poor whites and Africans existed, the landowners would not be able to make as much money as possible. And this is when they began to create the mind of the white supremacists and the mind for white racial identity. So you see, the DNA of it's particularly of the white North American supremacists, its racial identity actually comes from the British landowners. Now, what these 17th century landowners did was the classic divide and conquer. And they worked on the minds of poor whites by gradually giving them more privileges than the Africans and creating in the minds of the poor whites a sense of superiority over the Africans. This is important to understand, and especially important for the white supremacists to understand. What needs to be understood by the supremacists is that the supremacist is not acting under their own volition. They have been tricked and are continuously being tricked by a long-running, multifaceted scam largely perpetrated by the political right. Of immigrants, we know that they say things like they only send their worst people, and they say things like they poison the blood of America, which harkens back to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Excuse me for a second. Now, everything I've said about Bacon's Rebellion and its lingering effects is well-documented history. None of what I said is in dispute. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in a collection of essays adds that because of slavery, men convinced themselves that a system that was so economically profitable must be morally justifiable. They formulated elaborate theories of racial superiority. Their rationalizations clothed obvious wrongs in the beautiful garments of righteousness. Religion and the Bible were cited to crystallize the status quo. Science was commandeered to prove the biological inferiority of the Negro. King continues, so men conveniently twisted the insights of religion, science, and philosophy to give sanction to the doctrine of white supremacy. So this idea was embedded into every textbook and preached in practically every pulpit. It became a structured part of the culture, and men then embraced this philosophy, not as a rationalization of a lie, but as an expression of final truth. They sincerely came to believe that the Negro was inferior by nature and that slavery was ordained by God. And again, all this lies in the foundation of the foundational DNA and thought and philosophy of the United States of America. So it was the late Beverly Wildong Harrison. She was one of the professors of ethics at Union Seminary while I was there. She was a Presbyterian feminist theologian whose work was foundational for the field of Christian ethics. She is considered by some to be the mother of feminist Christian ethics. Now, I did not take a class with Professor Harrison, but I bought one of her books entitled Making the Connections. A full understanding of how we got here will only happen when we begin to make the connections to other moments in history. We need to be looking at the past and asking if there is any correlation to other historical periods. Now, several years ago, I discovered the work of a group of scholars that identify themselves as psychohistorians. They study the emotional origin of social and political behavior of groups and nations. Said differently, they examine the emotional roots underlying the social and political actions of groups and nations. Lloyd DeMoss is the founder of the Association for Psychohistory, and he's written on subjects like the emotional life of nations and the origins of war and child abuse. In the case of Nazi Germany, the child psychologist Alice Miller has a very plausible theory on how Nazi Germany got there, which, if she is correct, could possibly explain much of the violence, both racial and political violence, in American history and how we got to this period where the United States has hundreds of hate groups of various types supporting a particular candidate? The short answer is that the actual German book on rearing children in the early part of the 20th century would be labeled child abuse. The book they were reading on how to raise a kid would today be called child abuse. But here's a few points that Alice Miller makes. The parenting styles were harsh. German society, particularly during the 20th century, was often dominated by strict authoritarian parenting. Discipline was harsh, obedience was enforced, and individuality was sometimes suppressed. Many children who grew up during World War I had experienced severe economic hardship, including hunger, poverty, and social instability. In Germany, pre-existing anti-Semitic, racist, and nationalist ideas circulated in German society long before the Nazi regime. Children grew up in a culture where their prejudices were sometimes suddenly and other times openly expressed. By the time the Nazi Party rose to power, children were already accustomed to the racial hierarchy and anti-Semitic rhetoric that the Nazis propagated. Many children grew up during or immediately after the trauma of World War I, excuse me, and the normalization of violence and survival under extreme conditions. They grew up like that. For young children, this created an environment of fear, scarcity, survivalist thinking, and everyday experiences, which the Nazi regime later exploited in shaping their ideologies. The last point of Miller that I'll raise is that children were taught to detach from their feelings, leading to a reduced capacity for empathy. And this lack of empathy made it easier for them to support and carry out the atrocities of the Nazis without guilt or remorse. This lack of empathy and suppressing emotions in childhood undermined individuals' ability to see others as fully human. All of this made it easy for these children as adults to operate the gas chambers that killed millions of Jews because they were able to see them as scapegoats and the cause of their pain. But now, having said all this, I'm going to return to my opening remark. People of faith are called to the task of reconciliation. People who want the exact opposite from us, from you, are not our enemy. They have, just as each and every one of you in this room has, the Imago Dei, the image of God, stamped onto their souls. And with them, no matter what things look like, we must find a way to reconcile. Somehow or the other, I find it appropriate to close with the closing line of Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. He says at the end of his address, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all we may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." And that's all I got. Thanks for your time. So any comments, questions, or will I get run out of the room on a rail?
Boy, it's only 10:10.
Hmm?
It's only 10 after 10.
We could dismiss class early.
Thank you for that quick and and challenging review of American history. And of course, the Imago Dei is, the fact that the belief that we are created in the image of God is ultimately a Judeo-Christian, um, what do you call it? Is a tradition. And my man Heschel always will remind us that that is not in other philosophies. It's not in Greek philosophy. It's not in Roman philosophy. It's not in Chinese philosophy. It is not in Hindu, but it's only in the Abrahamic philosophies, religions, that the idea that we are given our dignity not because of our animal nature, but because of something else. And we are heirs to all that. We can't, the whole American experiment is based on that, that somehow we're all given by divine
Endowed by the
providence.
Creator
Yeah.
with certain inalienable rights.
But we can't, I think we cannot escape the Christian and Jewish heritage that informs the best of this worldview. And I'm also reminded by Heschel that he actually saw Hitler come into a theater one day, and he had said he had to turn his eyes away from Hitler because it was a desecration of the image of God. And I have to admit, when I see a certain political figure with many, psychological traumas of his own, it does seem to be a desecration, doesn't it? That all the goodness has been beaten out of him or never formed. And we therefore we can't, I'm just reminded of, there are some people we can't love. You just can't love everyone because you'll just strain yourself. But somehow, how do we tolerate this? And how do we make it a little better? Not a question to be answered, I guess.
Well, I'm not so sure that's not a question to be answered. But go ahead, Sal.
It's interesting that, history shows that the Nazis came to America and studied how we divided the population along racial lines and used that in their own work in Nazi Germany before World War II. And so, when people talk about Nazis, oh, that's terrible. Well, they studied us and what we were doing at the time. So it goes back to the whole idea of the racial divide, and how that all works out.
Yeah, it's important that you're correct about that. But also, if you've read Elizabeth Wilkerson's book called Caste, she talks in there about how the Nazis studied us and even concluded we can't go that far, on some things.
Right.
That we can't. The Nazis, they said, okay, we can't go that far. Yeah.
It's also, I've been reading a book about Native culture and bringing back Native ideas because a lot of Natives want to fight against colonialism, which isn't necessarily saying we want our land back, but we want Native American ideas and way of living to come back and to be more in the rule. And so much of what capitalism is and what we have now is scarcity economy. So it plays into the whole idea of Germany, scarcity economy. World War I was very scarce. So when you talked about that, scarcity of war, and if you can trust or you can make people believe that there's only so much and immigrants coming in, they're going to take it, you're not going to have it, which is totally against the indigenous way of life, which is life is a gift, you give. Sometimes you give and then you get back, and that's how you live in the giving idea instead of the taking, it's mine, nobody else can have it, you can't, and if somebody else comes in, then they're going to take my stuff.
Yeah, that's a part of American thought. Let me just say something. I want to speak to David's point about this notion of some people being irredeemable. Has anybody heard about rescue pets and rescue dogs in particular? and how, you know, these dogs who have been, you know, have led these lives that were, where they were so abused, but they then get into, you know, a loving environment where the animals themselves are actually cherished and they are turned around, you know, and they're capable of being in relationship with, you know, in ordinary human relationships or ordinary human dog relationships. Yeah. So, you know, which kind of, you know, gets to, you know, some of what I, you know, was trying to say about, you know, people, first of all, what happened to children in Nazi Germany. And it also begs the question of, you know, is the American system for nurturing children so good? You know, is us living, you know, and I'm talking about us now, you know, Christian folks living with this notion of spare the rod and spoil the child. Anybody ever really think about the horrible legacy that's leaving, you know, for children? Um, you know, so you know, there's it's time for some of us at least to you know, begin to ask a whole lot more questions than we've been asking. You know, one of the things that's kind of come to my mind, you know, assuming a Harris victory, you know, I'm going to write President, you know, potential President Harris, and whoever she points as, you know, the what do you call it, the Health and Human Safety Commissioner. I'm going to write them a letter that says, we need a healthcare czar. We need a mental health care czar, because something is clearly amiss. You know, if you can take, you know, something's amiss if you can, you know, if you have when you run out of stuff to do, I'm sure you have plenty to do. Look at the list of the number of different ways people have figured out how to hate. You know, it's mind-boggling. And the thing that you know, that amazes me, you know, it's tragic, you know, but it amazes me is that there are people who their identity exists only at the expense of others. You know, their entire identity exists only at the expense of others, which basically, you know, is suggesting that whole process of I always struggle saying the word individuation, you know, becoming an individual and, you know, seeing oneself as one of God's people, you know, that kind of got corrupted, you know. You know, but again, it's kind of like, you know, you can join me in a letter writing campaign, you know, we need a mental health czar. You know, because, you know, without talking about it, you know, pretty much the same thing that happened, you know, to Nazi Germany has happened here. You know, it's so easy to find a group of people who, for various reasons, only define themselves in oppositions to others. You know, so I take exception, David, to you know, to this notion. I hear
Your exception. I agree with your exception entirely. The unreadability has to do with the fact that the society as itself does not value the other. And Heschel said, you know, in perfect society, there would be no crime. So if there is crime, therefore the society must not be perfect. Because if we were all looked out for each other, then our needs would be, not because the economic needs, but it's, you know, it's obviously complicated, but yes, if you were to take a sociopathic person, someone with a you know, a personality disorder that cannot see the other and can only see others as projections of their own needs, you would put that person in a very confined environment and try to rebuild relationships and a feeling of faith and, you know, love and trust. And unfortunately, I believe President Trump does not have that.
okay, you know, okay, so I had occasion to read a book, the title of which was The Sociopath Next Door. Never mind how I got interested in such matters.
It's a great book. It's a very important book.
Right. Okay, but in that book, David, the writer, I can't think of her name right now. In that book, she says 5% of the population. So you get 100 people in a room. 5 of them are just sociopaths. Now, one person in this room. Okay, all eyes on me now. Let's just don't stop looking around. Stop looking around. Okay, but when the author says that, they're wired that way, that means, you could like dip a puppy in oil and they'll have no response to that. They won't be aghast with horror. Now, the interesting thing that she adds to that, though, is that other cultural patterns, tend to, because of, relationships around family, traditional, the very traditional values, other cultural patterns, the sociopath is not as likely to gain the influence and the expression that that they get here. In a culture, principally defined by money. I remember several years ago, I don't remember exactly which year it was, but they asked this young person, they said, what does democracy mean to you? And her answer was that you can make as much money as you want, which is kind of tragic, kind of tragic.
I'd just like to kind of go from,
Could you put the microphone on? Okay.
like to go from talking about other and hatred and necessity for reconciliation to the thought about resistance, which doesn't have to involve, which should not involve hate, but resistance to the evil that we see. And I'm thinking particularly now of the 2 newspapers who caved by not announcing a candidate of their choice, the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times. And I'm thinking, I wonder if we have to think ahead to our own resistance within the church.
I think you have identified something very important with reconciliation. The hard part is, how do we do it in such a divisive atmosphere when we can't agree on even the facts of the situation, or we have, quote, alternative facts that we have to deal with. We don't have a lot of experience in reconciling. And we do look for the church to be a place where we become accustomed to reconciling with love and so on. And that the church, at least as I know it, is diminished in its importance in our society. I also am struck by your comment about reaching the young person. And we have struggled with that. Our schools are struggling with it. Parenting is a problem. And we don't seem to have too many good answers for any of those things. So how do we reconcile, and how do we get at that hand?
Well, let me speak to that. You talk about the diminished capacity of the church. While it may be diminished, it's important that there's a group of people out there who say, "Thou shalt not." It's important that there's a group of people out there who say we are governed by "Thou shalt not kill." It's important, in terms of kind of the redemption of society, if you will, that there's a group of people that say, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." So the message of the church is essential, but it's also but to those who are in charge, the message of the church is frightening. It's kind of like good news for the poor is bad news for the rich. It's bad news, so it's frightening to them. So they're doing everything they can to blunt the effectiveness of that message. The other thing, the message of the church. What is the chief commandment? That you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's our message. Now that we struggle to get that message across, we're having a hard time getting that message across in the broad kind of way that it, needs to get brought, needs to come across. But simultaneously, you got Madison Avenue, who's figuring out, how to get us to continue to play a particular kind of game. You see what I'm saying? It's essential that the message of the church, and it's essential. And I'm going to run into, I know how some of y'all talk and think around here, but I'm going to, eventually we'll come to some peace about this. But it's essential, that we carry the message of Jesus, who says, "Whatever you do for the least of these, you also have done unto me." That's essential. So if you're looking for a point to turn around, for the culture to turn around, and a message for the church to, communicate to the world, we have the message. We have, and I've, made this point a number of times, the problem that the church has is, the church has spent too much time writing, quote unquote, writing sacred footnotes for the status quo. It's like, the church, maybe not here, but, the wars of drum get beat and we're right there with them. We're going to join, we're going to do that. This whole, idolatrous, kind of patriotism that gets advanced. We're right there, when they get ready to beat the drums of war, we're right there with them. And so we have to separate ourselves from that. And the thing for me is, we have to be willing to bear the cost of this. It's, one of King's, Dr. King's messages, books, or maybe, no, it wasn't him, it was David Garrow, wrote a book about King, and the title of it was Bearing the Cross. Jesus didn't end up on a cross because he was making a message that was consistent with that of, either Rome or the Paris, the major religious sects. He was on a cross because he was really very much a countercultural, individual. And one of the things I think all of us need to do is, really establish that spiritual connection with eternity, and to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to face the cross. Now, I will say that protests are a young people's sport, but being willing to be out there, in opposition to things that are harmful to people. And do it in a way in which it sticks. But again, I just needed to say, it's like the church has the message. It's like, can we deliver it? Yeah. Hold on, wait a minute, we got Pat over there.
Thank you for your talks, Pastor Phil. I'm trying to just get clarity. So on the third day is like Genesis.
It's
creating-
Wednesday.
Oh, okay. All right. I had this idea that you were talking about the foundations of like prejudice are, were created on the third day in America, right?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm clear now.
Yeah,
Okay.
and on the third day, Jesus rose. There's a little pun there,
Yeah,
Third
yeah.
day, Jesus.
I was trying to figure out which third day you're talking about, Genesis or what it was exactly.
Well, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
talking about Wednesday.
Okay.
I'm talking about Wednesday.
I'm cool with that.
And so brace yourself. It's going to be weird, but if you know why it's weird, it's a little bit easier to stomach. I would tell people often that, the thing that keeps me from going insane is that I've read Franz Kafka and George Orwell. It's gonna, they give you that context for the insane, that it's like, okay, even though there's this fictional, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Hold
well,
on, wait. So-
I was going to just state the obvious, which we all know, is we know that Trump is such an incredible narcissist. So when you're talking about reconciliation, everything is focused on him. And very difficult to, I mean, it'll be a long battle to get him to respond to, efforts to reconcile
Yeah,
with
yeah,
him.
yeah. Well, take the time, here, pass the microphone's going back, but take the time to consider, what I was saying about how Nazi Germany got formed, and also take the time to think about, how the effort that South Africa made, in following apartheid, with their truth and reconciliation commissions. I'm hopeful. What I'm expecting to see. I may not see it in my lifetime, but unless somebody is going, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and your neighbor as yourself, and unless somebody is saying, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, unless there's some group of folks doing that, we're in trouble. So we're important. We're important. Behind you, Sally, Nancy has the microphone.
You had said that you felt like protest was for younger people. And I just wanted to point to the group of not younger people that marched in the march against the Israeli bombing of Gaza.
Thank you.
Many of you are in the room this morning. We are not younger people, but I also resonate with Gail saying resistance. Can we resist? And I think that's a form of protest that perhaps our aging bodies could hold on to. I think what's happened to this congregation is that as we've aged, we don't have the stamina or the strength to be able to do some of the things we used to do and try to figure out how to protest, how to resist in a way that's appropriate for who we are.
There are orders of nuns. All they do is pray. That's how they're gonna move on. But I appreciate your point, Nancy. Thank you. Yeah, Sally's got her hand up.
One of the things that we did in this church with Janie Spar and Virginia, and what they talked about was you person the issue. And there's so many examples of personing the issue that people can hate the other if they don't know the other. But once they start to see the other and get to know the other, it's harder to hate. There was a study about people who were election deniers and said, it's terrible, it's horrible, they're doing terrible things. And then they became election inspectors, they became poll workers. And they started to realize that, no, actually, this is a really good system. This is a good system and there's not fraud. So when you person the issue, when you get people to at least take one step outside of themselves, or get to know somebody like, hi, I'm the parent of trans children. You don't like trans people. Well, so what does that say about our relationship to each other? A friend of mine who is a minister, and I went to college with her, is part of a group called Braver Angels. And it's a group that is of all different people who try to actually have conversations with each other about hard things. So there are places where people are trying to do this work of not staying in your own silo, not staying in your own echo chamber, but personing the issue and being able to go out there and say, this is who I am. We have a relationship. So what does that say about our relationship? And what can I tell you that might, at least put a question in your mind? You may never change Trump, but you might change other people little by little.
Right.
And that is a part of resistance too, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay. Is it my turn? Okay. Yeah, I actually, what I wanted to say was, in part what Sal talked about, thinking about your question about reconciliation. I think what it requires or what is a good step is people getting to know each other, having conversations, and this is what Sally was talking about, but having conversations with people, for example, who are Christian nationalists or people who adhere to some of the things that half the country supports with supporting Trump. And it's overwhelming to me that half the country in one way or another supports that. So how do we in our institutions set up some sort of dialogue? And I'll just say I worked on the Mexican border for 4 years and lived in Mexico. And one of the things we did was we set up dialogues with those folks who were anti-immigrant, who were coming to the border to basically persecute people in a way, in various ways. And so we set up dialogues with them, and some of them were Christians. They defined themselves. So I can't say more than that, but how do we do that? Do we set up dialogues with churches that we would call
Christian nationalists.
yeah,
Yeah, those places that say vote Bible.
yeah. Oh, or that disagree with us about access to abortion, or that disagree with us in terms of a lot of different things. Okay.
Well, again, you kind of, stick to our basic message.
Right,
Our
exactly.
basic message is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And see, because it's time for me to go. Believe it or not, I have someplace I'm supposed to be at 11 o'clock. Yeah. And if y'all would be polite,
No, but
what's that, huh? Uh-oh. Okay. Okay. All right. No, okay. It's really just, we have a great message. But we have failed to really understand it on its own. So we got a great message. I think it becomes kind of a question of like, let's go discover that message again. Let's go discover that message again. And, and this is not, I am by far, I'm about as far away from a religious fundamentalist as you can get. Where are the not fun, I'm over there. But I do know that love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul matters. I do know that the 10 commandments matter. I do know that love is patient, love is kind, that matters. Again, I'll just say that we've got this great message. It just becomes a matter of like being the people that really communicate it. It's, one of the, is there a list of children misbehave? Huh?
Could I just add?
Sure.
so Trump held up a Bible, do you remember? And he was going to sell them.
I saw that. I had the television on when that happened. I saw the
Has
military.
have any Christians actually taken him to task on that? What does that Bible say? What are the 10 commandments, Trump? Can you give them to us? What did Jesus say about the cross? I mean, I haven't heard anyone, it was an open door.
But see, here's the
He
thing.
was
Here's the thing.
selling them.
It's, for the religious right, it's not about religion. For the religious right, it's about power and influence and money. It's not, religion is the last thing on their mind, and because, Etta, tried to suggest earlier, this lack of, individuation, if you will, of having a real self, it makes it easy for them to go line up and say, we don't like immigrants, we don't like Muslims. It becomes so easy when when you begin to define yourself in opposition to another. So, I mean, we can keep this conversation going on. And oh, by the way, Trump's unfortunate, but he's irrelevant. Irrelevant. He really is irrelevant. And you just kind of, you have to kind of put things where they belong. It's like, it's simple as that. You a jive turkey, it's kind of like, okay, but I have someplace to be in 18 minutes now.
I think you should. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll see you guys in a little while.
And of course, we are not going to meet next week because the 50th anniversary luncheon is going to take some time, and we should spare some time and energy for that. On the 17th, there is going to be another food and kinship worship, which will extend the day a bit. So we will not have a forum on the 17th. But on the 24th, you're going to hear me trying to make sense of Christian nationalism. And boy, everything that we've heard today has familiarity to what I'm reading. I'm not an expert, and I'm certainly not a theologian, but it is obviously a very disturbing phenomenon, and trying to understand it, trying to make sense of it. But again, how do we resist it? How do we build bridges? What I've learned, I guess, is that you can't change everyone's mind, right? You can only create an environment that will invite people in to ask questions. Well, boy, that would be an interesting challenge, wouldn't it? To invite, and Christian nationalism is not the same as evangelical. We have to be careful about that. But that would be a reach, wouldn't it? And see what Gail has to say. If we invite someone from a hardcore, but that's the point. I don't think we can invite people from the hardcore. We have to fight this from the edges. Anyway, I will have things to say, and actually the forum committee, I don't, this is not a one-off. We've heard Christian nationalism last week from Mr. Bronson. We've heard it again today. I'm going to hear it again at the end of the month. This is a topic we have to revisit, because I think what we hear is also being heard in their environments. We have to, find a way to make America better again. They just have a different message.
You want that mic?
I have a handout for those who are interested in Witness Palestine Film Festival. I'm just going to stand at the door here. And if you would like one of these handouts, I'm happy to give it to you.
Better. It's, but and if you listen to Cornel West, he reminds us that we are living in our socioeconomic class in the American empire that is built on it's certainly economic domination of others within our own society as well as within the world at large. And the disorder may be that the arc of history is bending toward a justice that does not include the American empire.
You're right about that.
We're just living here.
At the moment. Can I end on a positive note?
Please.
Just ending on a positive note, on the way here today, I was listening to NPR. And all of you know about the great tragedy that Rwanda went through in 1994. Well, on the way here, I was hearing them tell all about how much improvement that country has made in building a